Welcome back to the Courage Keepers podcast. This is a space dedicated to the idea that courage isn't a solo act, it's a collective practice. At the heart of the Courage Keepers philosophy is the belief that bravery is most sustainable when it's rooted in connection. We focus on the pathways that allow us to lead with heart, and today we're exploring the compassion pathway with our guest, Vicki Wetterskog. Compassion is learnable. Courage seekers can intentionally increase the capacity to stay present with the pain of others and respond well. As a courage pathway, compassion helps seekers act bravely because it makes them drive to support themselves and others stronger than the fear. The compassion pathway is a route that courage keepers, can help seekers navigate, and one that sustains keepers themselves as they do that work. This episode explores ways keepers can help seekers follow this pathway across three different dimensions: offering direct compassion to seekers who are suffering, helping seekers develop self compassion so their energy is freed for courageous action, and helping seekers extend compassion outward towards others, because that outward turn is itself an act of courage. And that's why I have Vicki Wetterskog on today's podcast. Vicki is a native in Andover, Massachusetts, and earned her undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan and her graduate degree from Regis College. She's worked in healthcare since 2012, beginning her career at Massachusetts General Hospital's burn ICUs and later the Medical Surgical Transplant Plant ICU nursing team. In 2003, she transitioned into palliative care nursing to pursue her passion for supporting patients and families facing serious illness while completing her nursing practitioner education. She became a nurse practitioner in 2024 and now focuses on providing compassionate, patient centered care that allows medical treatment with each individual's goals and values. Outside of work, Vicki enjoys running, horseback riding, traveling, and spending time with her rescue dog, Birdie. Welcome, Vicki.
Thank you, John. It's so nice to be here. And this has been 10 months in the making. So I'm excited that we actually got to do this together.
Yes. And speaking of it being 10 months in the making, that's when I met Vicki at Massachusetts General Hospital when my father was near the end of life and very agitated state in his hospital room. And I was there, talking with him, even though he couldn't respond to me about some things about our lives together. And in walked Vicki and introduced herself and mentioned that she was in the palliative care department. And we talked. And one of the things that we talked about, and she asked me several very important questions. One was, what do you want? What do you want for what's happening with your dad? And I told her I wanted him to be calm and not as agitated as he was. And so she checked his vitals and said, to me, there's ways to we can actually do this and make this work a little bit better than at that time they were feeding him a lot of antibiotics to try to help with his pneumonia, but he was getting even more agitated and the pneumonia wasn't changing. And Vicky was there not just for me and my father, but my entire family during that period of time. And in developing this incredible professional relationship that I started, communicating with Vicky, and that's why I brought her on today to share a little bit more about the pathway of compassion and how powerful that is. So, Vicky, tell us a little bit more about the work that you do.
Happily. So, palliative care, kind of like it pertained to you and your family, we support not only the patients, but also the patient's family. And I think commonly it's really just the focus, in broad scopes, it's focusing on quality of life. And that can mean a lot of different things for people, but with the supportive palliative care, I think it's just like naming it and putting out into words so that medical teams that take care of the patient can, select interventions that can help get patients to that pathway. We frequently are with patients who have serious illness like cancer or dementia, Alzheimer's, heart failure. Those are a lot of the serious illnesses that we see in the hospital. because I work primarily on the inpatient side. And then a large part of that, of what we do as well, is symptom management within those serious illnesses. So pain management, breathing difficulties, something as even minor as constipation, but that can really affect how comfortable someone feels in the hospital, especially at their most vulnerable time.
Sure, sure. What brought you to working in palliative care, Vicky?
That's a great question. I can still remember. So my first ever interaction with palliative care, or even hearing about palliative care, was my senior year of college at Michigan, and I was doing a root cause analysis of, you know, how patients are spending their time in the intensive care unit and how can we improve this. And I did a lot of education with the nurses on that unit about palliative care versus hospice, because again, palliative care is not end of life care. And so that was my first glimpse of to the knowledge gap that there was. And then what drew me into nursing in general was hearing people's stories of their lives, right? So connecting with them in that and building
Hmm.
that relationship. And then that, after the years of intensive care unit nursing that I did, which gave me a lot of great opportunity to do that, what drew me into palliative care specifically is that realizing some of the most important moments in the work that I do is when someone is feeling vulnerable, when they're scared, when they're grieving, when there's a lot of uncertainty, or just trying to make sense of what are the next steps. So being able to kind of be that guide for someone really drew me into palliative care. And I would say that each patient I've taken care of who has passed has shaped that desire to really be that person to help navigate those difficult moments. So palliative care kind of gave me that ability to do that, especially in someone's hardest chapters, like your father, especially.
Sure, sure. Because when I met you, I mean, you came with a different angle of vision, and I think palliative care must do that in such a way to instead of looking at the mainstream of what the diagnosis is and what the next steps are and the patient's in pain, the family's in pain, and then you focus on that pain and with compassion and to try to alleviate that as much as possible you
Yeah,
know
and I think part of that too is making sure that we always get to zoom out, because especially in the hospital, we kind of get this almost like a fight or flight, right? Where we're hearing all of the scary
right.
information and we're trying to piece together of how do we fix these ones like specific issues. But then when we take a minute to zoom out and look at a person as a whole and say, okay, what has been a good quality of life for them? What are the things that they've loved to do? And how can we get them to be able to do those things again? If it's possible.
Sure, sure. So I look at you as a courage keeper, as I was mentioning in the introductions beforehand. So how is compassion a pathway to brave action?
Yeah, it's courage is a funny word, isn't it? Because it can often be associated with being brave and fearless.
Right.
And I think courage in the line of palliative care, whether it's from a patient or from a patient's family member, is shown in love. I think decisions that are made with courage focus on how much the person's love and doing something that's very selfless. So that can be, a daughter or a son having a difficult conversation with their father or mother because they want to make sure that they're honoring them at the end of their life, whenever that may be. It doesn't mean it's soon. It could also be a patient asking hard questions about their cancer because they want to make the most of the time that they have and have an informed decision of, all right, how do I get to plan out the next steps of my life? And it could be something as hard as a wife making a decision to stop life-sustaining treatments on her husband, of 40 plus years who's been critically ill for 3 weeks. Like that, saying I wouldn't want the person I love to suffer like this, and actually making that decision can be so 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 difficult. But
Mm,
the biggest thing is that you're never doing it alone,
right.
and having the compassion from the medical team and for yourself, which we'll talk about later, also gives us a reason to face that discomfort rather than moving away from it and shying away from it.
Sure. You talk about the notion of love. And Brad Montague, who I quote in my new book, Courage Keepers, it's basically where fear and love dance together, right? And it's just, it's a kind of a teeter totter back and forth during that kind of really, really challenging time. I think part of being compassionate, and also in knowing you, is how is warmth the foundation of truth when you're dealing with such a critical, life-changing events happening with patients and their families.
Yeah, I think that can also be a fine balance too, right, between fear and love, because I think truth without warmth can feel very harsh, and warmth without truth can also sometimes feel misleading.
Hmm.
So to have when you marry both together, I think that provides an opportunity for trust and for a way for difficult information to be heard a little bit better. Because I think the people surprise me every single day in my line of work, and we work ourselves up a lot of, oh, I don't know how to share this difficult information, or I'm worried about how the family will respond. But my sense is that most people can handle hard truths better than we think. But it's also how we present that information. And my goal, if ever sharing hard news, is not letting that person feel alone when they're hearing it, because warmth creates the safety, that feeling of safety and trust.
Yes.
And I think that warmth also tells someone that, I'm going to give you this hard truth, but I'm going to make sure that you're not alone, and we can talk about it. And that's why I also love this job, is because it gives me the time to talk about it. I can sometimes be in a patient's room for like an hour, talking about, like, sharing a piece of hard news, and then just helping people kind of piece through it and work through it. But they're never alone when they hear it, right? Because you never want to deliver the hard truth and then just leave the room, because then you leave someone reeling. But if you stay and offer truth and warmth along with it, you can it helps people feel cared for. And then that also, I think, allows them to face reality and, like, the next steps, and help them think a little bit more clearly about what they're hearing.
Yes, and I think one of the statements that you had said to me after we met that morning with my dad was that that he wasn't getting any better. And that was based on the medication and stuff like that. So it allowed almost permission to look at another way of going about things.
Right.
And I think that was really, really helpful in having conversations with you, um, and the attending physician, to have those conversations, to talk about how do we allow for him to have more of a calmness in his final hours and days there too. What questions do you typically ask of patients and families that are compassion related?
Great question. Because there's been a lot of research that has been done about this, of how do we how do we have a conversation in a very organic way, but also get the information that we need and understand how to best take care of somebody. So, a lot of what we ask is, first, the values. What is most important to the patient, the family in this moment? A lot of the answers we get is being with my family is really important, and being independent. Being independent is a huge thing for people.
Mhm.
From there, understanding, gaining, and hearing what people understand of what's happened, because that can actually be a really good launching point of, okay, do we need to have another conversation about a medical update so that everybody's on the same page, or can we have further conversations about next steps? We talk about hopes and worries, because I think within that lies a lot of people's, there's a lot of truth that lies within that, right? Because someone can say, this is my understanding of what's going on, and I hope for X, but I'm really worried that that's not going to be possible, right? And that's kind of that opening of having harder conversations. And I also ask a lot about what makes life meaningful for people, because A, that gets gives me a chance to know somebody and connect with people, and it ends up just being more information for me to deliver news, create a further create a relationship and a bond, because without that, I don't think there's much, it's hard to gain trust and
Right.
be kind of a guiding light for families and patients.
Yeah. So the questions really, I think you end up asking more questions than giving answers to, to allow for the patients and their families to have some level of control in the process, which
Absolutely.
is which is fascinating.
We're really good listeners.
Really
Palliative,
good. I bet. Yes,
palliative
you
care
are a good
clinicians
listener.
are very good
You're a
listeners.
really good listener. Yes, yes, that's true. The Kristen Neff, who's a pioneer in self-compassion research, she identifies three interlocking strategies. One is self-kindness, which means being warm and understanding toward our own selves, without judgment, which is challenging at times. The second is common humanity, which is recognizing that suffering, as you're talking about, imperfection and mistakes, are parts of the human experience. Everybody goes through some aspect of this. And the third is a sense of mindfulness, which means being present with our pain and fear rather than suppressing it. Okay. And kind of observing our own experience without being consumed of that. You know, how are those three strategies part of how you show compassion in the work that you do?
We'll go step by step. So with the self-kindness, one thing I see frequently is a lot of people being harder on themselves than they would ever be on their loved one or their father, their mother, their sibling. Because a lot of family members worry that they're not doing enough. So they just put a lot of weight on their own shoulders. Patients can often feel guilty for being a burden on their family. And then caregivers sometimes have this caregiver fatigue because they're tired and overwhelmed, and then that can also lead to a little bit of guilt. And I think part of my role with that, bringing in that compassion piece, is to help people to recognize, to give themselves a little bit of grace and self kindness about the work that they're doing, that they're already doing, that may not feel like enough, but also recognizing that the self kindness that they should hopefully show to themselves is something that they would also show to a different person. Right?
Sure.
That
Yes.
self kindness should not be different. There's not one should be more than the other. And there's, I think self kindness just creates a space for people to experience the human life, because that is part of what life is these peaks and valleys and hard times, easy times, which kind of brings in, then rolls into common humanity, where when you are sick with a serious illness, I can imagine it feels very isolating because you're the only one experiencing it. right? Physically,
Hmm. Yes.
sometimes emotionally. You know, as much as people say, here are support groups, here are like, here's a therapist for you to talk to, but that person is still the one processing those emotions. And I want some questions I hear commonly like, why is this happening to me? Or nobody understands what I'm going through. And unfortunately, and sometimes fortunately, suffering is part of being human and feeling that. But what's important to remember is that none of us are alone when we're going through that either. And that, loss, uncertainty, fear, aging, getting older, having that shared humanity, having we all experience
Right.
these emotions. It kind of hopefully helps people recognize that we're not alone because we all will go through these emotions at some point in our life.
Right.
And I think so. Self kindness is understanding that give yourself a little bit of grace, and there's also people going through this as well, and I'm not alone when I'm going through it. And then mindfulness, which can be very difficult, is I think with compassion is being willing to stay present in what's happening, even though it can be very difficult. And that's the hardest part because not a lot of people want to say, constantly be processing about what's been hard. You want to distract yourself. You want to move away from that
Yes.
uncomfortable feeling. But I find that healing and being able to find acceptance and move forward has to come with mindfulness. And that means sitting with grief, uncertainty, without needing to necessarily find an answer to it, but just recognizing that
Hmm.
it's there.
Yeah.
So, courage isn't always taking action for these emotions, but it's being mindful that they're there and that we are still human because we are experiencing these, and being willing to face difficult things, but also understanding that, we are only human. And that's no one everyone, like there's not one perfect way to navigate this.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. One of the things that I realized during my father's time at Mass General was that I was more in present moment because I didn't want to miss a minute of him where he was, but also being attentive to everything that was going on around me, and I think that was really important. I think for my own sanity and my own healing, after that. And you've talked a little bit about this, but how do you help patients and their families even be more self-compassionate when it's so much, as you say, it's hard at times for patients and families to give themselves grace.
Yeah, and I think ensuring that people are the self-talk that they're having in their own mind is the same compassion they would offer to someone else. Because again, this voice in your head should not be stronger than what you would say to someone else going through the same thing. In a perfect world, right? And understanding that what we are going through, unfortunately, is part of life. But does not mean that we failed at anything or that we have done something wrong. But it is kind of what makes us human in that experience, though we cannot always predict when it happens.
Yes.
And, palliative care, sitting with people, helping them acknowledge that grief, One thing we do a lot is responding to the emotion after delivering hard news. And that can mean, I can see this makes you really sad, or I can see that this makes you angry hearing about it. Tell me more about what you're feeling. And just allowing space to talk about it, I think, can sometimes help people get out all that negative self talk and then look at it from a different perspective.
Wonderful. Yes, yes. And so, how do you get families to shift from this self doubt that they might have about themselves to the care that's out there, caring for themselves? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think self doubt can certainly snowball and pull people inward on themselves. And granted, I do the exact same thing, and it's sometimes takes a moment to where you like bring your head above water and you look at kind of you zoom out and look at the big picture again of like what life has brought us. And I think bringing in self compassion when you are feeling a little bit of self doubt can help almost give you the mental and emotional breathing room, if you will, to kind of refocus on yourself or the person that you're taking care of, and allow you to connect and listen to others, provide comfort, experience love in a different way. And it's rather than saying, what am I doing wrong? Or what can I do better? It's
Mhm.
what does my loved one need from me right now? How can I provide that comfort that they need? Because what we feel like might need is completely different than what they actually want.
Sure, sure. And Cynthia Puri at Clemson University, she has a wonderful definition of courage, meaning that it's a pursuit of a meaningful and noble goal despite significant risk. And it certainly applies to what you're talking about, in the work that you do, because there's risks that you take every time you chat with a family, because you don't know them that well yet. You're not sure how they're going to respond, you know, uh, during these periods of grief, and also how families and patients can be more courageous during these periods of time, showing that self compassion, that common humanity, and being mindful of living in the moment. I think that's very, very important.
And
Vicky, go ahead.
I was going to
Yeah,
say, in
yeah,
speaking to your mindfulness that you had, I think it also allowed you to ask really great questions and seek answers. Because you, at that point, you were almost like a courage seeker of saying, okay, well, help me understand how we can get to this point. So I kind of putting it all together in the sense that mindfulness also allows us to stay present and ask and hear
certainly.
the information that we need to hear.
Wonderful. Well, Vicky, thank you so much for your time and effort. It's so neat connecting with you again, and that you are just a very important person in the lives of our whole family. Last late September, So thank you very much for being with us today.
It's my absolute honor. Thank you for having me, John.
You're welcome. And folks, stay tuned to our next podcast featuring the courage pathway of curiosity. You can also find more about the courage seekers and courage keepers on my website at www.thecouragekeepers.com. Thank you very much, folks, and thanks for hanging with us today. Bye now.